On today's episode of Podcasting Smarter, I'm going to be speaking with Zackarias of the Moderate Party. We're going to learn how the Moderate Party uses branded podcasts to spread the message about their political party. We're also going to learn how they use internal company podcasts to spread important information between members of the Moderate Party. Enjoy the episode. Zackarias, thanks so much for making the time to chat with us today. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you for the opportunity. It will be very fun to talk about the Moderate Party and our podcast.
Absolutely. I've been excited, and we talked about this a little bit right before we started. I've been excited to talk to you guys for quite some time here. You know, it's really cool to see how people are using podcasts in different industries, but really to see how you guys have leveraged it for the Moderate Party. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the Moderate Party in general, not even how you're using the podcast. We'll get into that, but just a little bit about the Moderate Party itself.
Of course, and I will not bring up the whole history of the Moderate Party. I will just make it quick. But we're the Moderate Party here in Sweden. It's the second largest political party, and we are the main opposition right now in the party in the Swedish Parliament. So the main opposition party, and our representative. Maybe I don't need to name everybody, but Ulf Kristersson is our party leader. And we have around 10,000 members here in the Stockholm area where I'm working and so on. So we are a very big party.
When did the Moderate Party decide to bring podcasting into your place of work?
We decided to start podcasting this year in February. As a result of the pandemic, we thought a lot how can we reach people when they are at home. And then the idea of a podcast came to mind, and we started to work and see what can we do about it, how will we do it, what do we need, we get the equipment, and then we started out, and it's going great. And so I hope we will continue. We have election next year, and we will continue with the podcasting because we think it's a great tool. And the results show that also.
Not only do you have what we call company branded podcasts, which are things that are put out to the public for them to listen to, anybody can access, but you guys also have internal podcasts, which are usually used to connect a team. Usually these are placed behind a username, a login, a company intranet, things of that nature. With all of the different tools out there in the market, what made the Moderate Party say, you know what, we want to consider implementing podcasting into both our branding strategy and our internal communication strategy?
Yeah, it's very simple, actually. We need to reach our voters in Sweden. We need to reach all the members. And we also need to reach some specific members, internal, and so on. So it was very simple that we need to have an external podcast and we need to have an internal podcast so we can get to both sides. And we find the solution on Podbean that you make an account, you get accepted, and then you can go in and you will find the internal catalog of episodes. And then we have the external everybody can access that. It's on Spotify and Apple and so on. So it's very simple, actually. We need to have both sides, and then we find the solution.
Let's talk about the company branded part first, because like you said, your main modus right now is you're trying to get the message of the Moderate Party out into the eyes and ears of the general public there in Stockholm, Sweden. How are you guys leveraging the public podcasts?
Yeah, we have our public podcast that is on Apple and Spotify, the most common the most common podcast catalogs where you find where podcasts is actually. And so what we did and how we do when trying to get the information out to the voters and to the members also is that we have two parallel different podcasts that we are running, podcast program, but it's in the same catalog. And one is called Stockholm's Podden in Sweden, and it's like translated to English is the Stockholm podcast. And this is our main community, our main podcast, and it's our first. And there we interview a lot of high top politicals from our party, and we also talk about a lot with the professors, and we talk a lot about a lot of people, external people from the society, experts in their area. For example, if we talk about planes, we get someone here that are an expert in planes, and so on. Environment, we get someone here that's expert in environment. For example, we talked about Afghanistan for 4 weeks ago. Then we bring in a professor who is a professor in Afghanistan studies. Example. So that is our main program, the Stockholm podcast. And then we also have our weekly podcast that we call Veckas Brief in Sweden, the brief of the week, and then we give talk about the top news the past week in a moderate perspective. So maybe we take a little interview with one of our moderate politicians. They talk about something that happened the past week that is important for us to get out to the members and also to the voters, and that we want to bring light on. So we have two parallel podcasts that we are running right now.
I think it's really smart for the moderate party to separate the podcast into different channels. Again, you can really make sure that each independent channel has its own voice and its own vision, which I'm sure definitely helps people understand more of what you're trying to dive into in each podcast. And for you guys trying to spread your message about what the moderate party stands for, I think that's really important for you guys.
Of course, and we see the results right now. We are number 9 of the most popular political podcast here in Sweden on Apple, and yeah, so it goes very well. And with the results, also the motivation gets larger, and we're looking forward to the election next year, and maybe we can grab the number 1 spot. Who knows? We'll see.
Now let's talk about a little bit about the internal podcasts here. With internal podcasts, usually people are using them for any sorts of training, internal communications, things of that way. And when we started our conversation, you had stated that you use this as a way to connect your team. In what ways is the moderate party using internal podcasts?
Yeah, we talk about a lot of things in our podcast that we don't want the social democrats and the parties that are our opposite to take knowledge of. Like, for example, we can talk about how do we win the election in one specific area, and we want to get that communication out to our members and our politicians, but we do not want this information to get in the hands of maybe the social democrats, because they are strategic and so on. So for example, we make an episode of we need to win a specific area with maybe 2 or 3 representatives from there. So how do we do? Yes, we talk about it. This is how we do. This is how we win. This is how we won last time. This is what we need to do. We need to have this strategic plan and so on. But we don't want that thing to come in the hands of the social democrats. Of course, we don't want them to know our plan for the coming election. So, for example, that is one thing that we put in the internal communication. So it's very easy for us to separate these two.
Like you said, this is content that you don't want getting into different people's hands.
Yeah.
You know, this is something where the communication needs to stick with the specific group, and it needs to be funneled to the proper people. But in order to be the most effective version of the moderate party, you don't want that getting into the hands of the opposition. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense here. And how have you seen podcasting bolster communication across your company? And what I mean by that is you have this channel now that you're using to deliver information across. And I know that you said with the public facing content, you're seeing that there's a lot of engagement. You're number 9 on the Sweden Apple podcast chart, which is amazing.
How for the political category.
For political category,
yes. Yeah, political category.
How has the reception been from the moderate party for the internal podcasting?
It's been very good. Very, very good. One thing is that number 9 spot. I mean, not number 1 yet. But the reception that we get from our members is that they get a lot of better contact with our representative. And as we all know, it's been a pandemic. People have not met. So we needed to find ways to communicate with each other, but maybe not in only conference or meets and so on. We need something that people can listen to all day, everywhere, anywhere. Maybe if you're cooking, maybe if you're going out for a walk, maybe if you're on work and doing Excel, for example. We needed something that people can have easy access to all day, all night. And people have really liked it and so on. So we are happy.
Of course, and especially in politics, I think that the ability to stay integrated and engaged with all of the content as much as possible can't be understated. You bring up that idea that everyone can be connected wherever they are. And like you said, that's the great thing about podcasting, is that you can listen to it when you're on a commute. You can listen to it when you're at your desk, when you're on a run, when you're cooking. It doesn't restrict you it doesn't restrict you simply to I have to sit down at my computer or I have to be in a conference. You have the ability to access that content at any time. So I think that's really
Yeah,
important.
yeah, and we can also put out long conversations with our representatives, conversations that maybe haven't happened if we didn't make the podcast, that people can, or our members and politicians can access. I mean, if we take for example Afghanistan, of course there are a lot of Afghanistan about the news, but we bring a representative from the party and maybe as a professor, as we did, and we talk about this in a conversation, a natural conversation where we talk about the problem, and we discuss and analyze the things, or the problem, the conflict. This discussion haven't happened would not happen if we didn't have the podcast. So the member and the politician wouldn't get to take part of this. So that is also another thing, that with the podcast it's very easy to use. It's very easy to create content, but it gives a lot more.
Talking about all of the different podcasts that you have, I'd like you to walk us through a few points of the production of the podcast. You have your public facing content and you have your private facing content. A lot of the
Mm,
times, these are completely different teams. A lot of the times, they are the same team who creates the content. So, the three questions that I'd like to point to are within the moderate party, who creates the content? Who produces the content, and then who releases the content to either your internal audience or your public facing audience?
yeah, of course. We It's not 100 persons that make this. We are a small group of people, and me and our weekly guest are the content actually, and makes the content. Then I produce the podcast episode after recording it, and then I release it through the Podbean platform. To if it's internal, I keep it on the Podbean platform. If it's external, we'll give it to Spotify and Apple and so on, and put it there. But it's basically a one man army. But also, I don't want to say that really, because I have a lot of support from my colleagues. Robin, my closer colleagues in this case, is helping me a lot with the technical things, and also get a lot of tips from our communication department and so on. They help me a lot. So I can say that it's one man army, but still it's not one man army. Do you see? Because in the process of getting everything rolling, we were a lot of people. But right now, when it goes, yeah, naturally, how do we produce? How do we do things? Now it goes naturally. I make it very quick alone. So right now, maybe you could say that it's one man army, but from the beginning, I wouldn't say that. And I always knew that I can always talk to my colleagues if I need help or something like that. So one thing, that if you want to have a successful podcast, you need a great team and great colleagues.
I think a lot of what that boils down to is that oftentimes you might have one person who the onus is on for a lot of facets of it, right?
Yeah,
You might be the person, for example, who's conducting the interviews. You might be the person who's hitting record. You might be the person who's micromanaging it to go to the different platforms or to stay just to your internal members. But there may be a team that discusses, okay, who do we want to bring on? What are the pieces of content that we want to talk about? What are things that we might want to stray away from? And I think that's an important separation, because I think that it shows both the ease that you, like you said, you can just pick up your phone, for example, or you can just go to your computer and launch an interview. But that's the recording side, I think. When it comes to how are we
yeah,
going to get to the content, I think you've given a lot of great credit to the rest of your team too, saying, hey, we're in this together. Even if I'm the person who's hitting record, that's my responsibility. That's the responsibility that I've been tasked with to get the content out. But you have a bit of a bigger team that helps put together, okay, what content are we going to put out? When are we going to put it out? And who is going to be delivered to?
yeah. I think you need to have not so many people, not too many people, not too many wills when you're doing a podcast. I think that is also one of the greatest thing, because if you're 100 persons who is in a team, then you have a 100 persons will, and I think that can complicate a lot of things. So keep it less is better. I think is in this case.
Along the same lines of the production here, once
Mm?
the content is created, how does the moderate party create awareness and engagement when new content is being released. And again, we'll separate this
Yeah.
first into the public facing content, and then we'll separate it into the internal content too, because there might be a couple of different strategies that
Yeah.
we might be able to go over.
Yeah, of course. In the internal, okay, if I start with the internal,
Sure.
we don't do as much marketing and create awareness of it, because then it's simple. We send out of email. It's very old school. We have an email list with the person who will get this episode, and we say, hey, this episode is out, go and listen to it. You need to listen to it, and so on. It's very simple. So we don't use Facebook and so on as we do in the external. But for internal, it's very easy. We just have a mail list and we put out an email saying, hey, this is out right now, and you should listen to it. And they go in on the Podbean account or to our internal platform, and they will find it. To the external, it's a little bit more. We have a little bit more things to choose from. But what we do is that we create awareness through, of course, mail lists once again, but not as often, because we don't want to spam people.
Sure.
We create awareness through Facebook, our internal Facebook groups. We have internal Facebook groups with over 1,000 members. So we put it out there saying, hey, now it's a new episode about Afghanistan, for example. If we take that for an example, and we maybe can send it out in an email, Afghanistan, come listen to this. And we also do not want to do as much marketing as we can. We could put a lot of money into it, but we don't want to spam people. Okay, that's the important thing. We want people to search for the podcast because they are interested in it. And but thirdly, we encourage our members to also work with the word of mouth method, the best method, if you ask me. If you enjoy the podcast episode, you tell your friends, of course. Say, hey, this is a podcast of Afghanistan. Come listen to it. Zackarias is telling a lot of great stuff, for example, and maybe they like it, and they will also tell their friends, saying, "Hey, listen to this podcast." And then it goes on. 2 people talk about it. Then we have 4 people listen to it, 8 people, and so on. And that is the one that we work with at most right now, because in the long run, sending out emails every when you release every episode, people will get irritated if you do 2 episodes a week, for example. But of course, we encourage our members to share it on social media. I mean, Facebook and Instagram, great platforms, and our politicians have a lot of people following them. They share it and so on, and maybe then another people share it. So bringing different guests, make them share it, and also make our members and voters share it to the people. So
Sure.
it's a lot of more choices when it comes to external and then the internal.
Of course. And I think when it comes to the internal, it's more how do we get the people who are doing the work that we need them to do? How do we get them engaged, and how do we get them listening to the content that we're putting
Yeah,
out? Because for them, it's not just recreation. For them, it's we need to activate on the things that we want the people to be able to vote on. So it's a little bit of a different
yeah,
funnel, and I completely understand that. I would say also that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially here in the U.S., politics are quite a hot button topic, and people are very passionate about politics, especially here in
yeah,
the United States.
yeah. Of course,
Um,
of
I
course.
feel like when it comes to political content, whether you are part of the moderate party or whether you're somebody who is passionate about what the moderate party would stand for, I feel like that's already in a way a very hyper engaged market, and I can think of a lot of different markets that might not have that same level of engagement. You might have what we call a passive audience, right? But
Yeah,
with something like politics, there's so much that goes on globally. There's so much that goes on locally that I feel like, in a way, if you just start putting out content and people really resonate with the message that you're putting out, even if you're not putting giant amounts of ad spend behind your content, you're still seeing that the message is being spread, not just in a bigger let's say a bigger foot stomp, or about bigger, not a bigger foot traffic, but you're also getting the engagement of the people who you really want to be listening to your content.
yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. I love that. Now, When we talk about the public side, we've been able to really hammer in the benefits of podcasting as a solution. And when we've talked about the internal side, the benefits we've talked a bit about have been about the communication that you've been able to see across the company here. So that's been really cool. Are there any other benefits that you've seen for using podcasting as an internal solution?
As an internal solution, I think it isn't as much change from the external, because still our politicians, they and our members, they are external people. We have people that are working for the moderate party, but that's not our audience. The audience is still our members, and so it doesn't differ that much between these two. But the thing is that we can navigate what questions we want our members to actually talk about. Let's say if we make okay, so crime, we talk about a lot about crime, and we want our members to talk about crime and shooting and stuff. People are shooting stuff and so on. And yeah, so what do? Okay, we make an episode of it and say, hey, this is not good. We need to fix this. We need more police and more cops and so on. So then we bring light on a question, and we give the signal to the members that this is an important question. We need to talk about it. Maybe in the internal process, we can say like, this is one of our main topics, main questions for the coming election. Talk about this, for example. So we can navigate what we want our members to talk about, and that's one great thing with internal. So you can actually navigate what questions we do want our members to talk about.
Now, one thing I always ask people who are using podcasts as either an internal or a public solution, one thing that always interests me is not just the positive sides of the podcast and how you've been leveraging them, but I also like to discuss some of the hurdles that might have come with podcasting, right? Because again, it is a great medium, but there might be some initial issues that you might have. There might be a few
Yeah.
things where you're like, hey, podcasting is such a new medium. We need to be able to get over these hurdles. So what have been some of the hurdles that the moderate party might have faced with having podcasts as a solution? And then what steps did your team take to mitigate these issues?
Yeah, I think the far largest hurdle has been the fact that we have a lot of old members in our party. They are very unused to listening to podcasts and using mobile apps. For example, this pandemic, we have a lot of problem to get our older members into Zoom meetings, for example, and so on. And that is understandable. Maybe they don't have an iPhone or an iPad and so on like we do, John. But that is by far has been the largest hurdle. But to overcome this problem, we have created detailed manuals and being very clear what they need to do, send out to their emails and pass them to their addresses and so on. So be very clear with the manuals. This is what you need to do, and also always have a contact person. Okay, they don't understand. So who do they contact, and when do they contact this person, and so on. So be very clear.
It's kind of like when you think of any sorts of company, whether it's whether it's you guys, whether it's us, one big thing that we always talk about is always have a point person and always make sure that anything that you want somebody to do has a clear set of instructions, whether that be like you said, a write up, whether that be a video, whatever the case may be. Always have some way to give that support to people. And what you said, especially when you talk about politics, you often have an older crowd who likes to continue to be engaged with the content because
Yeah.
it does affect them also. And I think you guys have done a really smart job with having those resources to showcase, okay, cool, here's how you can actually access the content. Podcasting for us, especially for a bit of a younger crowd, might be very easy. We might be more familiar
Yeah.
with it. Even if you've never listened to a podcast on a podcasting app before, you're familiar with YouTube. You might be familiar with listening to something streaming on one of these here mobile devices, right? So it's like, oh, it's just another app that you're using. But for an older crowd, I think it's so important for you to have those resources because you want this to be as inclusive as possible. You want your message to
Yeah.
get out to as many people as possible. And you're like, the solution is easy. It's very user friendly, but here's how to make it as user friendly as possible. Once you get used to it, it's just like riding a bike.
Yeah. So you don't need to complicate things. That's the
Right.
thing. We have a special ability sometimes to complicate things, but it's not complicated. We have a lot of problems with the older audience when what to tell them when a new episode is out, for example. And well, it's not hard actually. We can call them, say, hey, this is a new episode. Sure, this take a lot of time, or maybe go one of their meetings and say, hey, have you heard about this new episode or the podcast? Do you need any help to get into Spotify or something like that, or Apple and so on? And but the thing is, when they are in, they're not getting out. That's the thing. So they will listen to every episode and will be very thankful. So it's a heartwarming story to help an older lady to get into the Spotify or Apple so they can listen to the Stockholm pod.
My last question I like to ask all of my different guests here.
Yep.
If another business is considering bringing podcasting into their place of work, what is a piece of advice that you'd like to offer them in support of internal podcasting? And this can be
Mm-hmm.
any business, this could be a political party. However you decide to frame it is totally fine. But what is your piece of advice that you'd give to another business looking to bring podcasting into the workplace, either as an internal solution or as a public-facing company brand solution?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that, and I want to say that I think every people should try this. If you're a political party or a company, I think podcast is a future thing for people like Facebook. It will grow a lot bigger and so on, as we've seen under the pandemic and so on. So I think every people should try it. But okay, so first thing, what do you need to make a podcast? That's the first thing. What do you need? What equipment do you need? Do you have an idea? In what purpose? And so on. So when you get those things out, you can just create a podcast. It's very simple. It's not hard. But the thing is that how do you do on the way? And one thing that I've learned is to not try to plan the topics of our podcast episodes too long beforehand. In politics, it happens a lot of things. And sometimes we get breaking news from something. Maybe it's happened a very sad thing in Sweden, and we need to talk about it. So it's breaking news. Okay, so then we maybe need to put a planned episode on hold and get to this point to say talk about this. And when we do that, we get a lot of more not viewers, listeners in this case. So don't plan in beforehand. If you're a political party, if you're a company, I think you can plan beforehand. So you need to think, what do you want to do with your podcast and who do you want to reach? Another thing is that also have commitment and consistency, because a great podcast is not created over 1, 2, 3 episodes. I mean, we didn't have a lot of listeners in our first episodes, but now we are over 40 episodes and we have a lot of listeners. Place number 9 on the Apple Podcaster and the category of politics. So stay commitment to podcasting, and it takes time. It's like building muscle. You don't get big biceps over one night, and you learn a lot of the way. So actually don't give up and still going. If you think it's fun, you also need to think it's fun. And one thing for the political parties that maybe are listening, and also for the companies, is to always keep the conversation natural. So don't read out from the paper. Keep it like a normal discussion. Maybe you say a lot of things wrong. For now example, maybe I said a lot of things in English wrong and so on. But the thing is that it's still a natural conversation. And people want to hear a natural conversation when they're listening to a podcast. They don't want to see a video when everything is created beforehand. They want this natural conversation, like they are in it. I always tell the guests that we have on our show with politicians, and I tell them, imagine that we're eating dinner and there is no cameras, no microphones, nothing. We just eating dinner and talk about Afghanistan, for example. And it will come out great.
I think that's really the thing that people love about podcasts is it can be more natural, more free flow. And if you're doing something like a training podcast, that's not, I think, what we're talking about. But we're talking more about creating content that's
Yeah.
engaging and creating content interview format. We're talking about so many different facets where podcasting can really be, like you said, a medium where people can feel like they're having an honest dialogue. One thing I
Yeah.
always tell people is that if you're going to do a podcast, you can have bullet points, you can have questions that you want to get to, but having your responses recited or just written out, literally, you can read that. That's
Yeah.
fine. But like, I
Yeah,
think even the conversation we're having here, it's a very call and response. You're hearing how you're using podcasts. And for me, there's a response to that. I think that's really powerful. And, especially when you're trying to deliver different messages to the public, I think that really shows honesty, that shows more human element to it, as opposed to
yeah,
just, like you said, some sort of, for lack of a better term, some sort of canned response. I think it's really
exactly.
powerful, and I think that can really help. And you said something earlier too, and you kind of you tailed it afterwards, which I liked. When you're talking about time sensitive content, right? You're talking about, if you're a political party, maybe there's topics that like you wanted to about for months and you have them ready to go, but then something comes up in the news that you have to talk about right now. And that flexibility, I think, is really important, because you can have, and it's smart to have content ready to go, but like you said, a lot of people don't just want to hear about, okay, here's everything on this topic that's happened since the 1800s, right? We want to also
Yeah,
hear about what's current. We want to hear about your party's views on this. We want to hear about your company's views on, this new concept that came out. So I think that's really important to have, like you said, a balance between content that's time sensitive and timely, and things that you're going to talk about anyway, that you've maybe prepared, that you can mess around with when it releases.
exactly. And that is really what we have done. We have our weekly brief that we talk about the latest news, the breaking news, and so on. And then we have our main program, the Stockholm podcast, okay, and where we talk about things that maybe isn't breaking news, but it's still important questions for the society. So we have done that solution, but I still think that you learn on the way what works and what do not works, and that's why you need to stay also commitment to it.
Absolutely. Zackarias, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.